As you know, on Sundays, we're exploring the life of Disney artist Herb Ryman, how his experiences working on live-action films at MGM and later at Fox, along with his travels, became essential ingredients for the development of Disneyland. And on Sundays, we aren't yet up to the section on Disneyland. We're still in the mid-1930s. But here, in the middle of the week, I want to move up to 1955. It's the holiday season, which at our house is a big deal. We have the tree up and the stockings are hung by the fire. For years, our stockings have been looped over metal hangers that spell out Noel, N-O-E-L. But sometime over the last year, the N fell off the first hanger. But still, the lights are arranged out front. We have a little Christmas elf by our entrance gate. The kids are still in school, at least for another week and a half. In our little town, there's a parade this weekend, assuming it doesn't rain, and we'll have a cookie decorating party this Saturday for the kids and their friends. Here on the podcast, I'm shifting an episode called Disneyland's First Christmas up to the top of our feed for this midweek update. If you've ever wanted to get into your DeLorean and set that time flux capacitor for 1955, that is Disneyland's first year, and wander through the park months after it opened to experience what the holidays were like that first year, we will try to do just that in this episode. In its first year, the Christmas festivities at Disneyland featured carolers on Main Street. School and church choirs sang at the bandstand located just off the hub, renamed for the season as the Christmas Bowl. Local school bands marched down Main Street playing holiday tunes. The park added decorations, but the decorations were sparse by today's standards. Green wreaths and bows were added to the front of the castle. A freshly cut evergreen was placed in the center of the hub. Artificial white trees rose up around the bandstand. Garland was draped across the Frontierland entrance sign. Natural wreaths were hung on many doors on Main Street. Light strings were nailed up in select areas of the park, and according to one local paper, a, quote, sparkling Christmas tree was placed aboard the sternwheeler Mark Twain. Though to be honest, I've never seen a photo of this particular Christmas tree. But the big Christmas story for Disneyland's first year didn't involve traditional seasonal celebrations, rather a winter spectacular. A spectacular failure, that is. Years earlier, while Disneyland was being designed, many ideas were discarded, including concepts for entire lands. One idea that went away was a holiday-themed area that could be decorated each season to celebrate Christmas, then Easter, then the 4th of July. This area would have been located at the back of the park, roughly where the Matterhorn now stands. Another idea that never made it into the final plans was an area called Circus Land. As a boy, Walt loved the circus. In the studio's early years, the circus showed up in many animated shorts, as well as the film Dumbo. So when Walt went to dreaming up lands for his park, he toyed with the idea of theming one around a traditional American traveling circus. In its original incarnation, Circus Land existed as a single offshoot from the park's central hub, a lane filled with sideshow performers as well as a permanent big top. On one early planning map, this area would have been located as a cul-de-sac between Frontierland and Adventureland, so park guests could have wandered down a turn-of-the-century Main Street and then continued onto the side yard where another turn-of-the-century wonder awaited them, as though a touring circus had recently set itself up in an empty field. But this idea too faded as Walt's dreams evolved into a more workable reality. At the end of the park's first summer season, either August or early September 1955, Walt understood that he needed to expand or refresh the park's offerings, as Disneyland was drawing its audience largely from local residents, not a national audience as he had once hoped. New attractions would be especially important in drawing return guests during the school year and the winter holidays. That is, during those periods when families tended not to take long vacations. Walter Knott, owner of the nearby Knott's Berry Farm, also warned Walt that crowds tended to stay away from amusement parks in the weeks leading up to Christmas, as it was nearly impossible to compete with Christmas shopping and holiday parties. At first, Walt considered a Wild West stunt show as a means of luring Southern California residents back to the park for a seasonal visit during December. But after considering his options, he returned to those concepts he'd toyed with in previous years. The Circus Land concept, also an area that could celebrate the holidays. He thought he might be able to make something unique if he combined these two ideas into a single new area. In short, he wanted to combine them into a holiday circus that would exist in a new circus-themed area at the back of the park. Walt's general line of reasoning went like this. If Christmas activities kept customers out of Knott's Berry Farm, Walt would highlight Christmas inside his park to draw local guests into Disneyland. Furthermore, he thought he could adapt a circus show to feature the Mouseketeers, a group of performing children who would soon star on the Mickey Mouse Club, as the show was set to premiere that fall on ABC. Quote, seeking to boost attendance, a Disneyland manager recalled, Walt installed a circus in the unfinished area of Tomorrowland. Walt assigned wet artists Bruce Bushman and Dick Irvine the task of arranging the show and developing a circus-themed annex in the undeveloped area between Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. George Whitney Jr., an operations manager for Disneyland, was given the job of figuring out how to promote a ticketed show within the park. These three men, assisted by other WIT managers, started to make inquiries within the circus industry. Within weeks, they had lined up 3 groups that would provide most of the entertainment and know-how to quickly produce a circus show. As usual, the Disney managers looked for local solutions to solve problems at the park. In Los Angeles, they found Ted Duane, who oversaw the Duane Brothers Circus and the Duane Troupe of Aerial Performers. Duane, one of the few circus organizations based in California, agreed to provide most of the human acts for the proposed Disneyland circus, including trapeze, high wire, and twirling ropes. They would also train the young Mouseketeers how to perform some aerial tricks in the big top. Bobby Burgess, one of the early Mouseketeers, was part of the twirling rope act, with him spinning the rope for a fellow Mouseketeer. Quote, when they turned out the lights halfway, we glowed in the dark. I was a web setter, stabilizing the rope for Mouseketeer Bonnie Kern. A second organization, the Gilgray Circus, would provide most of the animal acts, including the elephants, camels, llamas, and trained dogs. Professor George Keller, somewhat of a circus celebrity, would provide the centerpiece exotic animals, specifically his trained jungle cats. Unlike other acts, Keller was signed to a year contract rather than the standard 6-week booking everyone else received. In all, 80 animals and 70 performers would be featured in the Disneyland circus. In terms of promotion, most all of these acts would also be featured on the first season of the Mickey Mouse Club. With this, the circus concept was on a fast track toward development, with the show tentatively premiering on Thanksgiving afternoon, which gave the development team a little more than 2 months to pull the whole show and themed area together. The problems came when Walt approached C.V. Wood, the first general manager of Disneyland, with his holiday circus idea. For the previous year, Woody had served as the vice president of Disneyland Incorporated, which in 1955 was a separate company from Walt Disney Productions. In his capacity as general manager, Woody had overseen the development and opening of the park as well as its day-to-day operations. As a financial manager hired by Roy Disney, he had also irritated Walt in attempts to cut corners to increase profits. Woody's company obligations were to the collective owners of Disneyland Incorporated, which included the ABC Paramount TV network, Western Publishing, and Walt Disney Productions. Walt Disney himself was only a 16% shareholder of Disneyland Incorporated. From the moment that Walt brought up the idea of a circus, Woody wanted nothing to do with it. The estimated cost for the circus varied depending on who was making the call. Walt estimated its cost at $300,000, a likely lowball guess. Van Arsdale France, a park manager, estimated it at $375,000. But Woody, who had a strong head for figures, believed it would cost $600,000, making it one of the most expensive features in the park. Woody explained that with attendance shrinking for the school year, he had no idea how the park would fare for the Christmas season. Woody again explained that the park needed to produce a profit, that it actually needed to make money, which from Woody's perspective was an idea completely foreign to Walt. The argument as far as Woody was concerned wasn't about the circus. It was about something larger than that, what the American people wanted and what they would pay for. It was also about running Disneyland as an actual business. "No, Walt," Woody finally said, "there ain't no way. We don't need no $600,000 effing circus right now, period." Walt, infuriated, narrowed his eyes but eventually walked away. Later that day, Woody picked up his phone and talked to Roy, hoping that Walt's brother would fix the situation. Woody explained that the park still owed money to various suppliers. They were barely meeting payroll. On weekdays, the park was so empty, it was easier to find an employee than a guest. And then there was the marketing pitch for Disneyland. Guests can see a circus any old time. Out here, they expect unique rides. "Jesus Christ, Roy, if you tell me to do it, I guess I don't have any choice," Woody said. "But I gotta tell you, don't ever ask me to lie to the banks, because if they ask me if I think it's a wise thing to do, I'm gonna tell them no." And then Woody heard a tone of understanding in Roy's voice, a tone he had heard many times before. The conversation ended with Roy agreeing that Woody, as general manager, shouldn't allow the park to be dragged into this circus enterprise if he felt that it would fail. Woody was, after all, responsible for the fiscal health of the park. That same week, Walt explained to his brother that the two big top tents with a purchase price of $48,000 might also be used in a live-action circus movie called Toby Tyler that he wanted to make. Likewise, those circus wagons with a yet unknown purchase price that he wanted to buy could be used as well. The circus at Disneyland was a way to utilize and monetize film props, Walt explained, as well as a way to increase the popularity of the Mouseketeers and the Mickey Mouse Club, a series that by Thanksgiving would have been on TV for only 7 weeks. Roy now found himself stuck in the middle. The resulting compromise speaks largely to how much power Woody had amassed within the company. The compromise was arranged as follows. Disneyland Incorporated, under the guidance of C.V. Wood, would not absorb the cost of the circus. Rather, Disneyland Incorporated would lease a large part of unused land at the back of the park to Walt Disney Productions for $1. Walt Disney Productions would then develop the circus, hire the performers, purchase the tents, and restore the circus wagons using funds from the studio's budget, with all money derived from the circus going back to the studio's coffers. In other words, Woody made Walt lease back an area inside of Disneyland to create the circus. With this arrangement in place, a rather upset Walt Disney continued to produce his holiday show. He placed an order for a new heart-shaped show tent at the cost of $30,000, as well as a sideshow tent at a cost of $18,000. He also bought over a dozen antique ornate circus wagons. 9 came from a local amusement park, the rest from an owner in Venice, California. Though many of the wagons were in poor repair, they were beautiful examples of the old circus parades that used to move from town to town in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Among them was a swan bandwagon, large enough to carry a 20-piece band and 2 drivers. Also various whisker wagons, which were enormous zoo cages on wheels, usually enclosed by beautiful statuine woodwork. 8 of the wagons, assuming they could be fully restored, would be included in a circus parade. Others would theme the new circus area, flanking the tent on both sides, and being used to sell tickets and programs. In addition to the wagons, Walt's team was able to locate and purchase a centerpiece attraction for the parade, a 1907 Calliope designed to produce circus music. It would cost an estimated $50,000 to repair. This was in ways a passion project for Walt. As with certain films and certain Disneyland attractions, such as the train, he was refurbishing the wonders of youth, bringing the joys of his own childhood into his present life. And all the circus would cost $300,000, a staggering sum for a limited show. Quote, "But we are quite willing to spend money in order to make money," Walt said. At the studio during their lunch break, many artists came out to watch Disney craftsmen and local woodworkers restore the wagons. Among them was Holling C. Holling, who, in a letter to his niece dated October 28th, described the process. Quote, "Walt bought a circus, and out back at the studio lot, the studios are 40 minutes away from Disneyland, fast driving. Carpenters are rebuilding old worm-eaten circus wagons in cages. It's fun to see them make new and the beautiful putty noses on carved wooden females, add new ears to those knocked off, fix battered arms and legs, hands and feet, until at last the beautiful ladies in gorgeous colors and gilt gowns gracefully pose once more on the cages of lions and tigers and monkeys. The circus," Walt says, "will last over an hour per performance and will have 6 elephants and 20 clowns. And all this will be just another addition to Disneyland out in another now unfinished part of the big lot, and so it goes." The official circus program also highlighted work on the wagons, pointing out that it was one of Walt's personal pet projects, perhaps suggesting even then that the company didn't expect to make a profit on the venture. Quote, "Taking it upon himself as a public trust and desiring to perpetuate the happy things of our American heritage, Walt searched for and found these original circus parade wagons. Researchers, artists, designers, and special craftsmen and wagon builders were enlisted by Walt in his desire for authenticity in their rebuilding. Circus historians and old-timers were brought in as consultants. The most significant restoration work was focused on the Calliope. It was repaired, refinished, tuned, calibrated, then positioned on one of the working wagons, one that was ornamented in the studio shops with a wooden dragon across its side. The 20-note steam-powered instrument and wagon together were now so heavy they would need to be pulled by a team of 6 to 8 horses. In addition to some of the work done at the studio, Disney outsourced some of the circus assignments to finish the project by Thanksgiving. The largest order went to the Horty Van Manufacturing Company. Horty Van, who supplied Disneyland with specialty flags, bunting, and various decorations, would decorate all of the Christmas-themed sets for the circus, including the wooden cutout pine trees, 4-foot-tall Christmas gifts, wooden snowman, and an enormous Christmas tree, made from parachute fabric that would rise to the center of the tent. The holiday program was officially called the Christmas Festival at Disneyland, which would run from Thanksgiving all the way through to January 8th. The featured attraction would be the Mickey Mouse Club Circus, which included the Mouseketeers, Professor Keller and his trained jungle cats, the all-clown band, Serenado, the world-famous dancing horse, trapeze, as well as trained seals, camels, llamas, baby elephants, and performing dogs. To promote it, Jack Lindquist, the park's first advertising manager, drove 2 Mouseketeers, Annette and Tommy, to Santa Monica to record a radio spot. Even though the Mickey Mouse Club had only aired for a few weeks, based on fan mail, executives could see that Annette by far best related to the audience. Quote, "I'm Annette, and I'm Tommy," the ad began, "and we're here to tell you about the circus." Tickets would be available at the front gate, inside Disneyland, and also at local grocery stores. The grocery store sales, however, turned out to be a disaster. As Lindquist recalled, customers had to buy tickets for a specific time and day. Quote, imagine all of those tickets and trying to find the exact day and time the customer wanted without a computer system in place. The whole thing blew up in flames because there wasn't a system in place to support the complexity of it all, and barely any tickets were sold in the stores. On weekdays, the park held 2 afternoon shows with a special performance in the evening. On weekends and holidays, the park held 4 shows. Tickets to the circus by themselves were 50 cents for general admission and $1 for the reserved section. That is, tickets to the reserved section were as expensive as an admission ticket to the park itself. Walt Disney, aware of the enormous expense, often highlighted the cost of the affair when talking with the press. Quote, we just had to have a circus, Walt told one reporter. The show will cost around $300,000. Our designers have done a magnificent job on both the circus decor and the Christmas decorative theme. This particular reporter, understanding the financial risk, commented to his readers, quote, while Walt Disney is known as the master of fantasy, he must deal too with cold hard facts, such as how many people visit his attraction and how much they spend. Amazingly, the show was at least prepared to open as planned on Thanksgiving. Foregoing a traditional turkey dinner, Walt Disney spent the day at the park. His big meal, according to one Hollywood reporter, was, quote, a ham and cheese sandwich and a malted milk. Beginning at noon, the circus parade worked its way down Main Street, with Walt Disney and actor Fess Parker as grand marshals. Both rode horses with silver-ornamented saddles and were followed by Roy Williams on a carriage, the big musketeer, who drew pictures and handed them out to children. The parade also featured dogs and ponies from the circus, as well as caged jungle cats and a troupe of clowns. Local bands were included in the day's festivities, as well as flag and baton units. Finishing up the parade was the carefully restored antique calliope, with its pipe billowing out tunes of bygone circus days into the park. The parade ended at the circus area, with a small crowd following the performers into the tent, though later presentations were emceed by Jimmy Dodd, the adult star of the Mickey Mouse Club. Walt Disney and Fess Parker shared the role with Jimmy for the inaugural performance. A chimpanzee walked on stilts, Serenado the horse played a song on bells. Jungle cats inside of an enormous metal cage leapt through hoops. The Mouseketeers performed one aerial act in which the boys twirled the girls around on rope ladders, 9 or 10 feet in the air. As Mouseketeer Lonnie Burr recalled, quote, the boys carefully swung the girls back and forth, not very creative, but nerve-wracking, since the girls could easily fall and be hurt badly. Bobby Burgess recalled that during one show, the Mouseketeer he was spinning, quote, slid down extra fast, and I got her big toe stuck in my mouth. But for the most part, the Mouseketeer acts went off as planned. Still, there were other problems. Quote, I'll never forget the night of the opening of the circus. Disney construction manager Joe Fowler recalls, Walt and I were sitting together. The first thing that happened, Owen Pope brought his big pumpkin chariot with his 6 beautiful ponies around and one of the wheels, caught one of the big diagonal posts that holds the big top up, and carried it away. I thought, oh God. It didn't cause any great problems, and they kept going on. Of course, I was more interested in what the hell was going to happen in regard to safety in the operations than I was in the show itself. The next thing that happened, one of my boys came out and said, Joe, the llamas have escaped. They'd gone up the railroad track, so I excused myself. Another Disney manager recalls that the llamas didn't confine themselves to the railroad track. They, quote, ran down Main Street as well. Fowler was absent for the next problem, but Jack Lindquist recalls, quote, on opening night, our trapeze act flew over the audience, which they loved, but our young female trapeze artist accidentally caused quite a stir. She wore a bra, shorts, and tights, but when she did the trick of putting her feet and hands up while her body was flying over the audience, her bra broke and flew off. This well-built trapeze artist whizzed back and forth completely topless. When Joe Fowler returned, Walt leaned over to him and whispered, "Joe, you missed the best part of the show. One of the leading ladies split her tights and came down with a lion." The finale, keyed to a Christmas theme, presented 3 elephants, quote, painted green, pink, and chartreuse, that paraded around the center ring. Various Disney characters, including Mickey Mouse and Goofy, joined in the march. As the Disneyland Entertainment Department didn't yet own Disney character costumes, the park borrowed them from a traveling Ice-Capade show. Most of the costumes were worn by mothers of Mouseketeers, essentially stage parents, who were paid $6 a day to participate in the performance. Quote, the premiere reached its climax when Disney threw a switch and lighted up the entire premises in an orgy of color. Santa arrived in a horse-drawn sled, and a Christmas tree made out of billowing fabric and illuminated from the inside like a neon dream rose up from the circus procession and lifted nearly to the top of the tent. But the biggest problem was not the one that happened with the animals or the performers. It was the one that happened in the bleachers, designed to hold a crowd of 2,500 people. They were half empty and remained so for the rest of the weekend. For a while, ABC considered airing the Mickey Mouse Club Circus as a 90-minute special called Disney Holiday Circus as a Christmas afternoon affair. But this idea never gained traction, perhaps because the show proved to be a failure at the park. As Joe Fowler explained, the circus performers never really fit the Disney image. Quote, they were a pretty tough gang, and we had a lot of problems, drinking, card playing, and whatnot. In the days following the opening, the tent never filled to capacity. To overcome this problem, Walt moved a large sign to advertise the circus out to the parking lot, allowing guests to buy tickets for the show even before they bought admission to the park. Walt arranged for a special Disneyland circus package. For $3, an adult would receive admission to the park, admission to the circus, and tickets for 8 rides. Nonetheless, the tent bleachers were mostly empty. One afternoon, by the big top, C.V. Wood told Walt that the circus might make money if it were shorter, maybe 45 minutes, as most guests don't want to take 90 minutes out of their visit to Disneyland to see a show. Walt, who never liked Woody, erupted with anger. "God damn you," he said. "This is my circus, and get out of here." Walt stepped up to the edge of the circus grounds, where a red banner advertised the big top. He pointed to the pavement, an invisible line that separated the rented circus property from the rest of Disneyland. "Get out," he growled, then waited for Woody to leave. Years later, Woody would admit that that was the, quote, biggest fight we ever had. But back then, he simply walked away in frustration. For a while, Disneyland attempted to increase holiday attendance through contests and regional events. On Monday, December 19th, they sent some Autopia cars to Pasadena for a publicity event. Quote, the famous kid-size autos will be brought to Pasadena through special arrangements made by Mutual Savings and Loan Association of Pasadena, one press release advertised. Children 12 and under will be given free rides in the cars on the Savings and Loan Association's parking lot at the corner of Euclid and Union Streets. Along with the cars, the Disneyland Spaceman, K-7 in his flight gear, and Little Sky from the Native American village would be on hand to meet the crowd. Some stores arranged raffles and giveaways for tickets as well to promote the park. But by Christmas week, everyone at Disneyland knew the circus was a failure. They also knew it had been Walt's idea, stemming from his childhood love of circuses. In part, Disney manager Van France put it down to practical matters. We learned that, quote, it was impossible to compete with Santa Claus and Christmas shopping. No show could have done it. We didn't need a special show the week after Christmas. We had more guests than we could handle without it. And then nothing could buck the public's stay-away mood after New Year's. But in ways, Walt Disney and his designers should have known that the circus was unlikely to succeed, especially with such a high price tag. In those early days, there were two ideas as to why guests were attracted to Disneyland. First, they wanted to immerse themselves in a detail-rich presentation of film environments like the western town of Frontierland. And two, they wanted to witness shows they couldn't find outside the park, such as the Rocket to the Moon attraction. The Mickey Mouse Club Circus fit neither of these design ideologies. Quote, "We could have put the circus at Fairfax and Beverly Boulevard in Los Angeles," Jack Lindquist would later say, "and it would have been a huge hit. At Disneyland, it was a yawn because people wanted to see Disneyland. The rides were bigger than any circus." The circus closed up for the most part in early January, except for Professor Keller and his Jungle Cats, whom Disney had signed to a year-long contract. Quote, "We didn't know what to do with Professor Keller," Jack Lindquist said. "We tried to negotiate a buyout, but he said, 'Nah, I like it here.'" For a while, Professor Keller continued to perform in the Big Top at the edge of Fantasyland as a lone act, typically with 5 shows a day. Guests could see his act for a B ticket or a quarter. But eventually, the tent was moved behind Main Street where the shows continued, so the old circus area could be opened up for construction crews to begin work on Junior Autopia, whose roadways crisscrossed the old circus grounds. Quote, "So for a year," Lindquist added, "we had good old Professor Keller and his lions." But aside from the business lesson about limited contracts, managers at the park took away a second, far more important moral. Disneyland needed to be perceived as a complete departure from outside entertainment, especially for rides and shows that required a separate ticket. It was a lesson that C.V. Wood knew intuitively, one that he would take to other parks he opened elsewhere in the country. In the years that followed, Walt worked to bring Christmas into the park in other ways. He hosted a Parade of Nations, highlighting the ways that people celebrated the holidays in various countries. He orchestrated the Candlelight Processional, which retold the story of Christ's birth in gospel and song. He also expanded the decorations used at the park, replacing those early efforts with an enormous live tree trucked in and positioned in Town Square. 3 years later, he returned to the idea of the Wild West Stunt Show. That idea would become the Zorro Stunt Spectacular, staged as a Western-style sword and gun battle in Frontierland, both on the roofs and balconies of the Western Outpost and the upper decks of the Mark Twain as well. But the lesson of that first Christmas was clear. This later show required no additional ticket aside from park admission. Like the Mickey Mouse Club Circus, the Zorro show featured TV celebrities, but it was relatively short and free for all in the park to enjoy. Before you go, a thought for today. Disneyland and Disney World are living canvases in which expressions of art and narrative change from year to year. We'll talk about that some on our next seasonal episode. But over time, Disneyland and Disney World have become, in small ways, a type of museum in which the parks celebrate and commemorate earlier waves of creativity. Though most everything from the Mickey Mouse Club Circus has now faded away, you can still find pieces of it here and there. Many of the wagons were donated to the Circus World Museum in central Wisconsin, where they are still on display. But the Calliope and the lovely Dragon Wagon are housed at a Disney park. For years, long after the circus left, the Calliope was used in parades at Disneyland. Then it was shipped to Walt Disney World. Some years ago, it was retired from regular use, though it is still on display in the Fort Wilderness section of Disney World. In the summer of 2020, when the new horse barn opened at the Tri-Circle D Ranch, the 1907 Calliope, seated on the Dragon Wagon, was housed in a new glass-fronted display case, restored to the beauty it possessed when it first moved down Disneyland's Main Street on November 24, 1955. Guests can press a button to hear the Calliope play When You Wish Upon a Star, which hopefully is all you need to well up images of the Mickey Mouse Club circus and Disneyland's first holiday season. If you ever have an extra day for sightseeing, the Tri-Circle D Ranch and the 1907 Calliope at Fort Wilderness are worth the trek. If you are a regular listener, if you tune in most weeks to hear the episodes here, you can support our podcast by becoming a monthly subscriber over on Bandcamp. On Bandcamp, you'll find hundreds of extra episodes, but the best reason to subscribe is to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can subscribe at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until next time, this is Todd James Pierce.